Support for GPR comes from UT San Antonio, offering degree programs and research focused on workforce development, student success, and health innovation across Texas. UTSA.edu. UT San Antonio, the University of Ambition.
Welcome to Fronteras, a program that explores issues at the border and beyond through the lens of arts, culture, and history. I'm Norma Martinez with Texas Public Radio in San Antonio. The U.S.-Mexico border spans nearly 2,000 miles. About 2,400 colonias exist in the U.S. along that border. 1,800 are in Texas. The vast majority of those colonias, 1,200, are concentrated in the Rio Grande Valley. And those colonias are home to roughly 188,000 people. The valley is already considered one of the most disadvantaged communities in the country. The inequities in health outcomes, income, and wages are felt more deeply in the colonias that span the valley's 4 counties. Colonias in general lack basic infrastructure, are economically distressed, and exist in unincorporated county land. These poorly regulated tracts of land often emerge from rapid border growth and weak enforcement, and are overwhelmingly Latino. Andric Gonzalez is a native of the Rio Grande Valley. He's a regional policy analyst who's dedicated to finding solutions to strengthen quality of life in that region. Gonzalez co-authored an article on Brookings called As Border Enforcement Expands, Colonia Communities Are Left Without Basic Infrastructure. He has explored the reasons why colonias arise and persist. Gonzalez says he became aware of the inequities within colonias when he started attending college at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley.
And that involved with visiting a colonia maybe about 2 years ago, south of Donna. And that's when I first started seeing what the everyday life sort of looked like in these communities. And after that, I journeyed through dozens and dozens of colonias the next 2 years. And while they're not monolithic in a sense, the issues that they face and the way that they navigate everyday life is to some extent very similar. And a lot of the times it has to do with these sort of infrastructural needs that they face. So growing up, like I said, it wasn't something I was familiar with, not until I was much older and much more involved with the community.
Well, we know already just looking at the statistics that the Rio Grande Valley in itself, very high health disparities, very high levels of poverty. In these colonias, those conditions are even worsened. Can you maybe give an overview of why it is, number one, that the Rio Grande Valley is so underserved and why it's more so in these colonias?
I was speaking with a candidate for the Texas State of Representatives, and he mentioned something that I thought fits very well to that question. The Rio Grande Valley isn't just the first place to experience everything, but they're also the last place to experience most of those things. And I think that's really where the problem starts, especially with some of these disparities. The insurance rates here are much lower. The physician-to-patient ratio is much lower. And that's just in regards to health, right? Even with some of these socioeconomic factors, the median household level incomes are much, much lower. And people like to attribute that to a lower standard of living. But nonetheless, you compare them to the state and you compare them to other similar regions, they're much, much lower. So are the wages. And that kind of transfers over to these communities, to colonias, which are a lot more vulnerable in that regard, being that they're not only not part of a city, they're unincorporated, but you're already in a region that is first to experience everything last. And these communities are part of that first to experience everything last at a much, much, much slower rate, just because of the neglect that they face, but as well as the lack of attention that they're receiving from the region itself.
It's really interesting because, within the cities, within city limits, you often do see racism written into policy, home buying, home lending, etc. But here it's a totally different story. These are communities that are located in the county outside of these city limits, and they're largely unregulated. And in your article, you do write about why it is so difficult for counties to really be able to regulate these communities. Can you explain sort of the difference between the cities and the counties?
Right. So, one of the big differences, and this is something that county officials have made pretty clear in the past couple of weeks, is the lack of authority that they have to enforce not just subdivision standards, but also zoning standards within the county. And cities are free to do that in the state of Texas. Counties are not. So this is one of the things that allowed colonias to proliferate in the first place, especially in the Rio Grande Valley. And it's sort of that lack of authority that prevents them from really kind of regulating what's going on in these counties. And although they have a much, much higher home ownership rate than the rest of the region and the rest of the country, usually the way they navigate into those homeownership loans and whatnot, and what you call a chattel loan, or usually an unstructured loan, that's treated more like a car loan, not necessarily a real estate loan. They have higher interest, much shorter terms, and fewer protections. And this is primarily due because of that lack of authority that the county has.
Many years ago, I did cover colonias in southern New Mexico, and I remember them telling us that, these developers bought up these pieces of land, they subdivided this land, and they would sell them to potential property owners at a very low price, making promises about water and sewage, etc., and those promises were never really kept. And so they were suffering, again, health disparities, poverty, living in essentially very hazardous conditions because they didn't have this basic infrastructure. Is that happening in the valley in these colonias as well?
Oh, at a much higher rate, I think, than the rest of the state. So in 2025, a Texas A&M study found that I think it was around 235 colonias south of Donna and in the Alamo region, which has one of the highest concentrations of colonias in not only in the county, but in the Rio Grande Valley. 23 to 27% of the population had much higher rates of arsenic in their urine. But not only that, we did a spatial analysis that found that these colonias are much more susceptible to flooding. The GAO had done one a couple years back that found that 95% of colonias were exposed to 100-year flood zones, compared to 6% of Texas overall. And our own spatial analysis found that 29% of colonias, about 80,000 residents, experience 10-year flood zone at much higher rates. The Texas Office of the Attorney General also has their own database that determines different indicators that these colonias are experiencing. And although they might be outdated, they do find that 20% of colonias are exposed to yearly flooding. And I think this is compounded by the fact that these communities are much more exposed to waterways that are a lot more polluted, the Arroyo Colorado being one of them, as well as the Donna Reservoir. Both of them have been recognized by the EPA as having high concentrations of PCBs amongst their fish. I think in the case of the Donna Reservoir, the highest amongst any ever recorded fish. So I think this compounds that sort of public health issue.
Enrique Gonzalez is a regional policy analyst and has co-authored the Brookings article, As Border Enforcement Expands, Colonia Communities Are Left Without Basic Infrastructure. When we come back, addressing the imbalance in funding on the border.
I don't think the problem or the issue really is we have to choose one or the other. I think we're willing to spend this much money in regards to border enforcement, then we need to start paying attention to the communities not too far from that apparatus.
Our conversation continues next on Fronteras.
If that extra car you have won't pass a smog test and you're starting to feel it's time to say goodbye, donate it instead. We'll get top dollar for it at auction. Proceeds benefit Texas Public Radio. Visit tpr.careasy.org to get started.
Welcome back to Fronteras. I'm Norma Martinez with Texas Public Radio in San Antonio. Texas has invested $11 billion on the border, specifically on border security and enforcement. That money has not trickled down to the border communities in need of investment to improve quality of life. Regional policy analyst Enrique Gonzalez has co-authored the Brookings article, As Border Enforcement Expands, Colonia Communities Are Left Without Basic Infrastructure. Gonzalez talks about the ways colonias in the Rio Grande Valley continue to be disinvested and what needs to be done policy-wise to improve conditions in these often unregulated, unincorporated communities on the border.
I don't think the issue is we have to choose one or the other. I don't. I think it's pretty clear that we're willing to invest this much into the region, this much into the border. I think a friend of mine put it pretty clearly, a county official. He said, what is it that we're trying to protect, right? If we're investing this much, what communities are we trying to protect? And I think that speaks to the case. I mean, the Government Accountability Office reported in 2024 that any support from the state and really the federal government in regards to colonias diminished after 2010. And we have several different organizations, several different agencies within the federal government that do help colonias, but only 2 out of those 5 that do really have mechanisms to track. The rest of them don't really even know where much of their funding is going to. They know it's going to border counties, but they're not sure how much of that funding is reaching colonias. So again, I don't think the problem or the issue really is we have to choose one or the other. I think we're willing to spend this much money in regards to border enforcement, then we need to start paying attention to the communities not too far from that apparatus.
Well, a really interesting fact that was pointed out in your article, and I think it is something that is a rather surprising fact, is there hasn't been, I believe, in any official capacity by the federal government, any recording of colonias that may have grown or expanded since 1990. That's 36 years ago. So can you explain to us why that is?
I think that's one of the biggest problems that colonias face and the communities really that have colonias within them. Prior to 1990, the New York Times wrote an article that really kind of drew the attention around colonias. Colonias were sort of a topic of very niche discussion at that time. But in 1990, Congress passed the Cranston and Gonzalez National Affordable Housing Act. And this act formally defined what colonias were. But it also declared that any colonias that formed or expanded after its enactment could not be classified as colonias. And I've spoken with county officials around the region, and many of them recognize the fact that colonias not only have grown, but also have started to spring up. Like I said, this is an issue in regards to their lack of authority when it comes to enforcing any subdivision and zoning standards. The existence of colonias and colonial-like communities has continued to expand, but because of this federal definition, there's really no authority that the state has or the local government has to kind of enforce the classification of former colonias or new colonias. And we saw this twice, actually, in the state of Texas. So Texas used to have the Office of Colonial Initiatives, which was dissolved in 2017. But prior to that, in 2010 and 2014, after 2 assessments that they had conducted, they asked the state legislature in Texas to update the database that they already had, which they were unable to due to that 1990 federal definition.
So is there any advocacy going on right now? Any efforts to try to convince lawmakers at the state or federal level to try to ameliorate this? Because I know that Congressman Vicente Gonzalez, I think he put forward a bipartisan bill just last year to try to change that definition. So there is bipartisan support for this. Is there a reason why it's stalling out?
You know, I'm not too sure why it's stalling out. And really, I think the perfect time that they could have passed this was in this past Housing Act that they passed this past January. But you're right, there is bipartisan support. It was Vicente Gonzalez and Monica de la Cruz, a Republican and a Democrat. And the reason they're trying to update it, first of all, is Hidalgo County, which has the highest colonial concentration, not just in the state of Texas, but in the entire country, somewhere between 700 to 900 colonias, is set to lose access to the Colonia CDBG set-aside funds that the Department of Housing and Urban Development administers through the 1990 Cranston and Gonzalez Act. Not only does it define colonias, but it set a population threshold of 1 million for the counties. And in the case of Hidalgo County, that population threshold is to be reached maybe within the next 5 years. Once it's reached, they lose access to that CDBG set-aside funds, which is really what prompted not just Vicente Gonzalez, but Monica de la Cruz to even sort of start enacting some sort of measure to mitigate that response.
But I mean, would even moving that threshold up to a population of 2 million make a difference for those community development block grant programs? Because, you know, we are seeing the Rio Grande Valley also with a very rapid population growth. Many areas across Texas are experiencing that. But that doesn't mean that it is going to equal increased funding to solve all these problems. It just means
Definitely.
more people in distress.
Right. No, and you're 100% right, and I'm with you on that. And look, I like to give the benefit of the doubt that maybe these counties don't have the administrative capacity to even target that pool of funding, right? During a single decade from 2014 to 2023, both Cameron County and Hidalgo County, really the heart of Colonia America, received only $4.2 million of that CDBG Colonia Set Aside Fund. Cameron County received, I think, 2.6 million, and Hidalgo County received about 1.5 million. The home to 40% of colonias in Texas, right, received just that little. At the same time, they were springing up projects somewhere between $190 million to $265 million. So the capacity is there, but it becomes a problem of neglect, rather, where these counties really aren't giving that sort of attention to these communities. So you're right. I mean, you could update the population threshold, but if these counties aren't targeting the funding that already exists, then really what is the point?
Well, I mean, this isn't necessarily addressed in your article, but it makes me kind of make the leap to think that maybe a lot of the people who are living in colonias, they may be immigrants who may not necessarily be here with the proper documentation. They're not here with legal status. And so maybe they might feel hesitant to ask for support, to make their voices heard, to bring their concerns up because this very high investment in border security and some of the actions that they have probably seen and witnessed themselves. Have you seen or considered any of that in the research that you have done?
Yes, I did actually, Norma, and I did run the numbers. I did not provide them due to that current political climate. And generally, it's about 1/5 of Colonia residents are undocumented or have some sort of other legal status. But I think the problem really comes down to these communities feel neglected nonetheless, right? To the point where that sort of accessibility to officials and whatnot isn't something that they look for initially, or at all, really. They're not involved as much because they're so used to the neglect that already exists that they've kind of feel almost accustomed and mistrust that existing process. So, I mean, I know where you're coming from. It could be an issue regarding legal status. But like I said, I ran the numbers, and I think that's one of the misconceptions when it comes to colonias. I've heard it come across throughout the past 2 years that I've been working with colonias. But I think it's more an issue of mistrust rather than an issue of legal status.
Well, the article does propose a number of recommendations, and we talked about a few of them, including changing the threshold of 1 million before the funds end. But what are some of the other recommendations that you make in this article that could potentially help address some of these disparities in these colonias?
The two most important ones for me are, first of all, reestablishing the Texas Office of Colonial Initiatives. So before it was dissolved in 2017 by Governor Abbott, this agency had a network of a bunch of people that were served as the liaison between the state and the 6 counties with the highest concentration of colonias. This agency also had some minor jurisdiction in regards to the database. I think granting them more jurisdiction to update that database is one of the things that the state could be doing if they do reestablish this agency. But also giving some sort of authority to the counties that they already don't have. It's mostly in regards to the zoning and subdivision standards enforcement. One of the recommendations we make is an inter-county compact, which is possible in the state of Texas through the Interlocal Cooperation Act. And I talked about this earlier. If administrative capacity is such a problem, I think these counties could benefit from pooling their capacity together and start addressing some of these needs, whether that's doing their own census count, right, at the local level, or applying for grants together, addressing some of the infrastructural needs together. That's, I think, one of the more important ones. I do think that most of the responsibility falls to the local government, not necessarily in terms of the authority that they have, but I think speaking to that mistrust I spoke about earlier, it's become an issue where the federal government isn't going to do anything, the state government isn't really going to do anything. I think it's up to the local government to start doing that in an inter-county compact.
Well, you brought up a little bit, you hinted that, it's a kind of an undercounted area, that there's not a very strong census response. And one of the things that is very important about these census numbers is that if you respond to the census, it gives you a good idea. That kind of equals federal funding. So, increasing that census response is very important. But is there anything else that a community within those colonias can do? We're talking sort of about what outside sources can do. What can communities do to help lift themselves, to support themselves?
Now, one of the strongest institutional measures that I've seen has really come from the nonprofit sector. In El Paso, for example, a nonprofit called Dig Deep provided waterway systems for 72 colonias in a colonia not too far north from El Paso, I believe. And here in the Rio Grande Valley, you're starting to see actors like Methodist Healthcare Ministries investing upwards of millions of dollars towards these communities. And I mean, you see much smaller nonprofits at the local level within these communities. And they're seeking out partnerships with these much larger nonprofits that are probably more statewide or nationwide. That way, these needs can go addressed. Maybe those smaller nonprofits, and I can name a few. There's a Raíz Adelante, for example, in the Alamo region, Proyecto Desarrollo Humano, not too far from Mission, Texas, a little west of Mission, Texas. These actors are partnering with other institutions who have the capacity and really have the funding to address these issues at a much more localized level, like I said, just because of that sort of mistrust that they're used to and that neglect that they're used to coming in from not just the local government, but of course the state and the federal government.
Well, Andri Gonzalez, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this. We'll make sure to have a link to your article on our website, tpr.org. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you so much, Norma.
Andrique Gonzalez is a regional policy analyst and the co-author of the Brookings article, As Border Enforcement Expands, Colonia Communities Are Left Without Basic Infrastructure. The article was co-written by Brookings fellow Tonantzin Carmona. Find a link to the article at tpr.org. Fronteras editors are Dan Katz and Yvette Benavides. The program is produced by Maria Navarro and Norma Martinez. Chiranka Cakewalk composed our theme music. Hear past episodes at tpr.org and on the Fronteras podcast. I'm Norma Martinez with Texas Public Radio in San Antonio. Thanks for listening.
The largest sports tournament in the world is about to arrive in Texas, the 2026 FIFA World Cup.
Teams from across the globe are set to play at Dallas Stadium and Houston Stadium in June.
Whether you're a diehard fan or just a little soccer curious, we've got you covered.
When the World Comes to Texas is a new podcast from KERA News.
We'll talk to the people holding down the sport and the culture here in Texas.
It's out now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.